I just want a Christmas tree and a giant bumblebee.
Make my wish come true. All I want for Christmas.
All I want for Christmas is a bee. Man City drew with Crystal Palace, so now they're not very good anymore. Everyone thinks they're out of the title race. But are they actually worse this season? Me and Jon Mackenzie and I, are going to work out whether they are or not. And we're going to start by looking at underlying numbers, because the real numbers tell us that they're 5 points worse off in the league this season than they were last season. Mm-hmm. They're out of the League Cup, but they're about to be in the Club World Cup thingamajig and all the other competitions that they're in. But underlying numbers tell us everything we need to know.
Yeah, and when we say underlying numbers, what we usually mean is expected goals for and expected goals against. If you're putting up a lot of
we could just say expected goals, yeah.
Yeah. Expected goals for is, you're generating lots of chances, that's good. And expected goals against means you're not conceding many chances. That's what you want.
Oh.
So the gap between those two is important, and that's expected goal difference, right? So expected goal difference is the gap between your expected goals for.
I understand this bit, yes.
Yeah. This season, Manchester City have dropped their expected goal difference by about 25%.
Holy moly.
It's declined, it's got worse. So last season it was around 1.2 expected goal difference per game, which is massive, right? It means that you'd expect them to score 1.2 goals more than their opponent.
Yes.
But as we know, 0.2 goals isn't possible, so that doesn't happen. This season it's dropped down to 0.9, so still very good. You're still expecting them to put up around 1.
But I raised to you can't score a 0.9 either.
That's true, you've got me there. But yeah, decline of 25%, not good. Now, there's lots of things that we could talk about why that might be the case. And, expected goal numbers, they fluctuate. It could be the case that Man City end up doing really well in the second half of the season. And
they tend to overperform their expected goals. So that they're declining is interesting in itself.
Yeah, I think so. And what we're seeing this season is them just sort of falling back in with the rest of the pack. Usually they're so far ahead of everyone else that even if they decline a little bit, they still easily one of the better teams.
Yeah.
But now they're back in amongst the rest of the teams.
Well, last season they were this same stage. They were second behind Arsenal. The season before that they were top 1 point ahead of Liverpool. So it's not a huge amount really. But if we were looking at reasons why they might be slightly worse off, like for example with a sort of pre-prepared data viz that suggests a reason. Do you have anything like that?
Yeah, so I've been looking around to try and find reasons why it could be the case that they're struggling a little bit. And I think one of the things that stands out to me is the fact they seem to be conceding massive chances. So in the Crystal Palace game, they only conceded 5 shots, but their XG was around 1.7 according to Opta, which is, it's massive. One of those chances was a penalty, which is going to be around 0.8, so already a big chunk. And then another one was a tap-in, which was around the same sort of figure as well. So not allowing a huge amount of chances, but actually those chances becoming really big, likely to be scored chances is a problem. So that suggests that maybe there's something going on with their press a little bit, their high press. They're going to try and stop opponents moving the ball down the field. Usually they're very successful at that, and that means they can control games. But this viz that we've got from Mark Our Stats, who puts lots of great viz out on Twitter, suggests that what we're actually seeing is that Man City are getting worse at stopping teams from progressing the ball down the field. So this yellow line here is Man City's pass completion in build-up.
Yeah.
And as you can see, it's high the whole time. So Man City is still very good at progressing the ball down the field themselves. But when it comes to their opponents, you can see that figure is creeping up, which means that opponents are getting better at building through Man City's presses, particularly this season. That's higher than it's been across the course of the last 3 seasons.
It's unlikely that every single team has got suddenly better at being able to pass through that. It's more likely that City are the ones who are slightly worse at pressing, right?
Well, I think there's a couple of things going on. I think one of the things that we're going to talk about is going to be personnel changes, because Man City have lost certain players. But I think there's also structural reasons as well. I think what we've started seeing is teams now being aware of how to manipulate really aggressive high presses, where they go player for player, finding space in behind. That's something that happened a lot in the Man City-Chelsea game, where Man City were pressing really high up the pitch, leaving space in behind that Rodri has to patrol. Chelsea finding ways of getting through that really quickly, so one-touch passing through the press, and then being able to expose Rodri in a lot of space, and that led to them generating a lot of chances.
So other teams are getting better at putting pressure on themselves, and City are getting maybe caught with this a few times.
Yeah, I think so.
And that could be possibly because of changes in personnel. So let's go through a few of them. So for example, this is like a team from last season. This is maybe the Champions League final team, was it? So a few things that we've got here that are different from last season. Erling Haaland is not having a bad season. He scored 14 goals. His XG is about 14.79. The weird thing with this is that he is now underperforming his XG. And the thing that makes Haaland special is that he always overperforms by a massive amount. So you've got Holland who's not quite there, but let's put these players out who are maybe. So he's now injured for a little bit, and he's underperforming slightly. Gundogan is gone. He was enormous. He was like a captain, really useful in all phases of play. He is also Gundogan. I'll tell you this for free. He is the second highest expected goals player on the team last season. So by not having Gundogan in the team, not only are they missing that huge influence on the pitch in terms of everything else you get outside of goals, but he's also, he's like their second top scorer last season was Phil Foden, but Gundogan is on 8 goals last season from an expected goals of 7.5 because he turns up at crucial moments that gets you win. So you're missing your second highest XG getter. Producer, yes. What else have we been missing? Rodri's been injured quite a lot this season, or suspended.
Yeah.
Stones, hugely important last season, injured a lot of it. De Bruyne has been injured for all of it. And so now you start to see a small problem in the Man City.
Yeah, we've also lost Mahrez as well, who's been sold off as well. So, yeah, if we look at the team that they had last season, you're now down to sort of bare bones with a few players brought in.
And I forgot about Mahrez. Like even there, I forgot about Mahrez. Mahrez last season as well. So he played 30 games in the league last season. Mahrez, 35 chances created in open play, 16 in set pieces. And this is a crucial bit because Man City, a lot of their goals do come from set pieces, either first or second phase. Now De Bruyne obviously is a huge loss because not having him in the team, you immediately lose for the whole season, so it would be different per game, but 68 chances in open play created and 28 from set pieces. So that is immediately you're missing like hundreds of chances by not having Mahrez, De Bruyne, and Gundogan just in there. Like Riyad Mahrez last season, 10 assists in the league. Just forget like how important he was, and they're missing that sort of player. So Bernardo Silva's having to play out here. They try to fix it by bringing in other players, but that hasn't quite.
Yeah, I mean, even with Jack Grealish, we've seen Doku coming in, Grealish not being played as much, so you've got a little bit of flexibility there. Nathan Ake we've seen Guardiola being brought in here, and so Ake hasn't been playing as much as this wide centre back as well. So you're sort of talking about players here who weren't playing a huge amount. The players who were playing this season didn't play a huge amount last season because there's barely anyone left when you start taking all of these players out.
Well, let's look at what the squad looks like now, and I can show you what the squad looks like now because we prepared it on the board. Here's what it sort of looks like. Would we take the ones who are injured, or is that going to be a silly thing to do?
No, I think it's fine to keep it as it is. But the things that stand out for me is that there's just areas where there's not really backup, and you're not getting like for like replacements.
Where?
In any way. Well, I mean, we've talked about Gundogan, right? So one of the big questions about this squad is what do you do with Phil Foden? You can play him in wide areas, you can play him as an 8, but it seems as though Pep Guardiola has misgivings about Foden being played in certain positions for various reasons.
He's very good wherever he does play.
Sure, no, I totally agree with that, but he's also a very different profile to the profile of Gundogan, right? Which, as you said...
Even in a specific thing on Foden versus Gundogan, you can see in the Crystal Palace game, because it's Foden who loses. It's harsh on Foden this, but he carries the ball through the middle late in the game, which is then where the turnover starts, which then results in the penalty that he gives away. But I don't think Gundogan does that. I think he takes the ball, shields it, holds it for a second, just a little bit of La Pausa, and then... Yeah,
Gundogan is a high-volume passer and a box crasher. So the two things that you talked about there, one of them was he scores a lot of goals just arriving. This isn't Gundogan, this is Foden, but I'm just using him.
I get it.
Yeah. He gets into the box, generates chances, and that's really dangerous. But a high-volume passer, so the Pep Guardiola system is based around, lots of quick passing to get through lines of pressure to move the ball down the field and generate dangerous chances. Phil Foden, again, he's, as you say, he's a bit more of he likes to carry the ball, likes to try and cause problems, likes to get into attacking scenarios, and in tight spaces can be very, very good. But he does turn the ball over a lot, and that's one of the reasons why Guardiola's talked about having misgivings about playing Foden there. And then the other players behind Foden, particularly in this spot, would be players like Kovacic and Nunes, who we were told were brought in at the beginning of the season because Guardiola identified the fact that maybe having good ball carriers in tight spaces would allow you to break through lines of pressures in a way that is different to passing the ball through lines of pressure. Neither of these two players seems to have worked out particularly well, and so we still have the problem of this area of the pitch. How do you solve it? Sometimes we can play Bernardo Silva in here as well, but then you've got Foden out in the wide area, and we don't have any real backup in terms of wide options. We've got Grealish and Doku, so you've got basically 3 players or 2.5 players to be able to fill in the wide spots. Rodri backed up by Calvin Phillips, who's again barely been played. for whatever reason, Guardiola doesn't seem to trust him. We've got a player like Sergio Gomez, who's a fullback who, again, we've barely seen play at all. And so what you end up then with is the functional squad is this big. You've got players who can sort of fill in behind other players. So Alvarez is sort of a striker, but has also played as backup to Kevin De Bruyne as well. So he's sort of a half-half player in between these two positions. We've got the same with Aki, playing between a sort of left-back position and a centre-back position. And I suppose you could dump and I suppose you could dump Guardiola into that kind of role as well. We've got Walker as well, who has generally played as a fullback. Didn't play much last season, and again, we don't really have any backup for him apart from maybe Rico Lewis, who is again another between player between a central midfield spot and a fullback as well.
Guardiola likes a small squad. He likes a small squad, and then if you look through the previous seasons with City, a lot of the players tend to play about 22, 23 games each, so they all are fresh to play every single competition. So like they get good squad rotation, a good amount of minutes each. It also keeps people happy because you don't have one player sitting on the bench apart from Calvin Phillips. Yeah, so that's sort of by design, but I can see especially the absence of Mahrez is here. Selling Cole Palmer is something they probably didn't plan for until the last minute, right? So what is the fix then? What do they need to do differently? Or
well, to respond to your point you just made that Guardiola likes a small squad.
Yeah,
I think generally yes, that's true, but he generally has a small squad where he's happy interchanging players, right? So he'll have one player who he can play instead of another player, and that doesn't bother him too much. So he'll pick whoever he thinks is going to be better for the tactical game that he's about to play. And I guess the Grealish Doku interchange here is the closest we get to that. There's some games where he'll play Doku, some games where he'll play Grealish, and he'll be happy to play both.
That's true. Yeah.
But there's not many other positions on the pitch now where he's got that kind of interchange. We saw that with Rodri. As soon as Rodri isn't available, what do? You don't really want to play any of these backups, and Rodri is such a unique player and such an important player to this system. You've lost it. Same with Haaland and Alvarez. If you're playing Alvarez as a backup to De Bruyne, and then Haaland is off, and now you're playing Alvarez here. Now you've got the problem of who do I play in the 8th spot as well. So I think that this does feel a little bit different insofar as previously it's felt as though Guardiola has a squad where he can be we can mix things up, we can change, bring players in different ways. Now it's just a case of him constantly trying to fit square pegs in round holes. And that's why when it comes to the second half of the season, and as you said, the narrative is always, it's fine because what will happen is Guardiola will find a solution to this and everything will be grand again.
They're always better in the second half of the season.
They generally are, but the reason for that is that Pep takes a team which are generally performing pretty well and then finds the thing which just makes them
like John Stones moving into midfield last season that helped win them the treble.
Yeah, and this time round, I don't feel as though this is a team which just needs that one little tweak where suddenly everything falls into place. This feels like a team where all around the pitch, there's just lots of tweaks taking place every week for him trying to sort things out.
And they're covering all those injuries and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I wonder whether or not what's happened here is that we've just got a squad which is, sort of coming to the end of its cycle a bit. Because I think when you have a manager like Pep Guardiola, you can paper over a lot of the cracks because he can find tactical solutions. But I think what's happened in recent years has been that the squad building hasn't been good enough. I mean, if you look at these players here, we've got 4 players in a small squad anyway who simply don't get on the pitch unless, they're 3. I mean, Calvin Phillips comes on usually 3 when City are 3 goals up. Same is true of Nunes and Kovacic. These are players who he's not bringing on the pitch unless you've got a buffer of goals to make sure it's going to be okay.
But then maybe they're just getting waited out for a few months so they learn how everything works properly. Because we see if the press isn't working quite as well, and people will be able to play through it. So what you have, if you also have players like Foden and Doku playing more, and they're more likely to turn the ball over. If your press isn't then
Foden as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Foden and Doku. So if they're not. If the unit itself is not as good at pressing or to putting pressure on high up the pitch, and then you are also turning the ball over more, and then you don't have someone like Gundogan in midfield to control it, and Rodri's missing, suddenly you're missing all those important bits, and you're also missing your star player is Kevin De Bruyne. I suspect heavily that when De Bruyne is back, if he gets to the levels of last season, which he should after a little bit of time, then that would be enormously helpful. I don't know if it's in the transfer market they could fix anything. I don't think anything's hugely wrong either. It seems like because of the way they want to play and control games, like we're talking about before, so if they want to control games that way, it naturally later in the game, if they're not then able to control the pressure and the opposition, those big chances we talked about at the very start are where they're going to concede chances from. Because it's not like teams never dominate them or batter them. Villa were pretty good, to be fair. But then again, they have less of the ball and they hit them where the space is.
Yeah.
And so when they're missing those key players, that's where the problems lie. So Does it need to be fixed? Are they worse? What do you think?
I think that this feels different to me than it has felt in previous seasons. Even last season when Arsenal were 7 points ahead at whatever point it was, I still felt as though Man City had been, they'd variance down, things hadn't really gone their way, and it felt as though they were going to have that moment where they just became a juggernaut. This season feels a little bit different to me. I think there's a lot riding on Kevin De Bruyne coming back and being immediately as good as he has been in previous seasons. And I think, there's questions about whether or not that's going to happen. Like De Bruyne played most of the end of last season with injury, and you could see that very clearly in some of the games where, it was very much City trying to get ahead and then only attacking through Haaland and De Bruyne and hoping that the two of them could pull something off once they were goals up. This season they brought him back from that first hamstring injury and he got immediately injured with his hamstring again. I think there's questions about whether or not De Bruyne is simply going to come in and be operating at the same level that he was. I think that there's a lot hanging on that working out in order for them to be dangerous. And as I've said elsewhere on the pitch, it doesn't feel as though this is a situation that is going to be fixed by a tactical tweak. It feels as though there's too many players that just aren't at the level that you would usually expect for a Pep Guardiola team. So this is the first time where I felt as though there's a big chance Man City might not win the league.
Oh, big chance Man City don't win the league now. The underlying numbers show they're not as amazing as usual, but I think they're going to be just fine. And I'm never wrong. That's our video about Man City.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including David Ornstein, Daniel Taylor, Ollie Kay, Amy Lawrence and Rafa Honigstein. With the latest transfer news and insight on every Premier League football story that matters, theathletic.com puts you inside football. And you can try it for free now for 30 days. See the link in the description.